Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm a college counselor and have read applications for a small liberal arts college and 2 research universities. My twins are recent college graduates.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of 2 daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, Lisa and I continue our conversation about an email that I received from a family that is very happy their student ended up at a public honors college instead of at the Ivy League school that many family members had attended. Then I'm going to play a SpeakPipe message from a mom with 2 students who shares a somewhat different but also somewhat similar experience that she had. For a question from a listener, Susan and I discuss a message from a mom who wants to know if a student-led admissions presentation is a red flag. We have a brand new interview, and it's with Dawn Williamson. Dawn Williamson works for Comcast Advertising, and Dawn is the Chief Revenue Officer for Media Solutions. She's hired hundreds of employees over the years, and she gives us some guidance on what she looks for when making a hiring decision. And it'll be part 1 of 3. And for our spotlight, Kevin Newton is back, and he's sharing some brand new developments that are very interesting that are happening in the world of international college admissions. And friends, Vince and I were going to record on Monday, but that got pushed back to tomorrow. So I know on Monday's episode, I said Vince would be discussing an article in the news. Sometimes these things just change. You know, sometimes I wonder, should I even be doing previews? Because I hate it when I do one and it doesn't pan out. But there's a lot of moving parts here. So I ended up subbing the session I just recorded with Kevin in for Vince. And Vince and I will record tomorrow. Friends, in some ways, I feel like this is our listener feedback episode. In this episode, you're going to hear from a mom. Then you're going to hear from their student. You're going to hear from another mom via SpeakPipe with a recap of her 2 students. And at the very end, you're going to hear a story from a dad that's really neat. So make sure you stay all the way to the end to hear that as well. I only have one announcement today. Jin Chow, the co-founder of Polygence, is doing a webinar for us, and that's on April 13th at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 Central, 6 Mountain, 5 Pacific. And trust me, you do not want to miss this. Jin is bright as a whip, very personable. She's great at responding to questions, and she totally transformed my thinking of what Polygence was. I had a complete paradigm shift, and it is very favorable, and it's something that I really want our listeners to know about. Even if you think, well, research is not for my student, that's not for me. Well, if you attend, I know you're not going to regret it, because you're going to meet someone some point in your life, and you're going to say, I'm so glad I learned all that Polygence had to offer, because now I can refer them to this opportunity. And I do need to apologize to you, because the one thing about the podcast, everything's exposed, right? We have a podcast. There's no hiding at all. And you guys know by now, like, when it comes to technology, I suck. I'm terrible. I'm like in the bottom 1%. I already know that. And everybody who works with me knows that too. And they knew that at KIPP. It's just the way that it is. I work on it, but sometimes you just don't have certain skills. Your brain's not wired a certain way. And Joy got that gene from me. Anitra, she's great. And Karis got that gene from her, but I don't have it. So anyway, there were tech issues. So I announced this on Monday. And, maybe 8 hours or so after the announcement went out on the podcast. And we also sent this letter out to our 100 counselors and Counselors Connect talking about Jin Chow interview. And I said, let me see how many people have signed up. I went on. I'm like, nobody. I'm like, uh-oh, something's wrong. So I took a couple hours trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't fix the tech issue. I was getting these emails basically saying that I need to give people permission to sign up. I mean, nobody wants to go through all that. So finally, after normally YouTube videos can kind of help me, but this time I was still at a loss. So I ended up reaching out to Joy. I remember somebody told me a long time ago, if you're having cell phone problems, find a 6-year-old. Well, my 26-year-old did the job. Dad, I can fix that. So she got it up working for us, but it wasn't working until probably like noon on Tuesday. And so if you tried to go up, sign up for the Jin Chow webinar, you wouldn't have been able to sign up. But now everything's smooth. They're coming in. Responses are coming like crazy. Very happy about that. Just go to yourclosetbrownkid.com. Under the events page, you can't miss it. And you'll see a link and go ahead and sign up. And we look forward to seeing you. I'll be doing that from Dallas, Texas, from a hotel in Dallas. And I'm excited to see you guys. It's been literally 6 months since we've done a webinar. It was like September, October of 2024. All right, friends, let's transition to our In the News. It's this part 2 of 2 with Lisa.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
So, friends, I want to read the email that I read last week, just in case you never heard last week's episode. That'll help you to understand the context. So this is the email. You see why I call it the email episode. So the mom shares the actual college he's referring to. I'll tell you it was Harvard, Yale, or Princeton, but I'm just going to always say Harvard, Yale, or Princeton just to not out the school. So the context is I reached out to a mom and daughter just to see how college was going for them, for the daughter, and I copied the mom and the daughter on the email. And so I got this response. I think the University of Arizona has been really good for her. It's been academically challenging with the double major of astronomy and physics. She's also going to try and minor in astrobiology. I think it was a blessing she didn't get into Harvard, Yale, or Princeton for many reasons. She's been able to take advantage of things that only U of A offers, such as a class in Biosphere 2, attending a conference in Biosphere 2, getting a paid outreach job at the Astrobiology Center, getting to know the lead scientists on the OSIRIS-REx NASA mission. She's already won a paid Arizona Space Grant Consortium internship to work with a faculty member searching for oceans on exoplanets. Another faculty member emailed her after class and offered her more research opportunities because she was asking such good questions in class. She will be working with him this summer on research related to supernovas. She's made excellent friends through the Honors College and has enjoyed living in excellent honors housing with on-site dining, classrooms, and counseling. The winter sunshine is incredible, and she's loving experiencing such a different place than the Western state that we grew up in with new food, music, and other things. It's been a great fit and such an amazing price. She received a $128,000 of merit money, and we are so grateful. Multiple exclamation marks. I can't imagine how there could be a better bang for our buck. We can't thank you enough for all your help. I'm such a big fan of what you do. Keep up the amazing work with these crazy times with the podcast. I hope higher ed and K-12 can survive this chaos and craziness. So that was the email, and this was my response back. This is amazing. What a great story. I know you're private, but how would you feel about me reading this on the podcast? Of course, I would never mention your name. I won't even mention the college, but some people did not take getting into their selective colleges they applied to very well. It can really impact their mental health. They need to know there is hope, and I cannot think of a better way to give them hope than to read your email. I could also exclude anything if there's something, even without your name or state, that you wouldn't want me to read. Response from mom. Share all the info you want. Use the names of the universities. Use the states that we came from if you want. I want to spread the gospel to all I can, exclamation mark. I am annoyed as an Ivy alum that I fell into the trap a bit. I always believed Arizona would be a great fit for my daughter, but part of me hopes she would go the same school that my father and I went to. I can say with total conviction that this is a way better fit. And it's so hard to justify that giant price tag and pressure cooker atmosphere of an Ivy, 4 exclamation marks. Now I feel like we have this awesome way to beat the old narrative. Also, I was an alumni interview for Harvard, Yale, Princeton for years, and I quit because I'm tired of great kids not getting in. An admit rate of 3% is just insane. So I read all that last week, but do we get new listeners? And I want you to have the context, otherwise you're not going to understand the conversation Lisa and I are about to have. That was last week. Now I want to share what the student said to me in an email this week. And I read this with her permission. I want to echo everything my mom wrote about me being really happy with U of A and being ultimately glad I didn't end up at Harvard, Yale, or Princeton. I've had so many great opportunities and made so many incredible friends, and it helps that U of A is just a fraction of the cost of what Harvard, Yale, or Princeton would have been. As a high-achieving student who puts a lot of pressure on herself and always has, I think the supportive learning environment in the Honors College puts a lot less pressure on me than the more competitive environment of Ivies and grade inflation would have had. The more supportive environment has been much better for my mental health since I have a bad habit of comparing myself to others. I'm ultimately so glad I ended up where I did. Thank you so much for all your help throughout the process and for checking in with us. I'm honored you featured my story in your podcast, and I'm so glad to hear it's helping people. So now you've heard from the mom and you've heard from the student. Now, isn't that powerful? I do want to make one correction. This student was a sophomore. I believe I said she was a freshman last week. And I know some of you must have been thinking, come on, Stuck, that can't all be true. Is she Superwoman? How could she do all this stuff in 6 months? Well, the story doesn't end there. One thing I love about podcasting is you just never know who's listening. The dean of Frankie, which is the name of U of A's Honors College, was listening to the episode. So he reaches out to me. His name's John Pollard. And he says, thank you for reading the letter on the air. And I'd be more than willing to come on a podcast to tell other listeners more about Frankie. And he thanked me for the letter, and we have a pre-meeting tomorrow to plan the interview. So Linda interviewed Tara Williams, the dean of Barrett Honors College, another good honors college, Arizona State. And of course, I've always wanted to interview somebody at Frankie, but I actually didn't have any connection there. So it was on my to-do list. So the timing of this was perfect. Let's pick up now with part 2 of my conversation with Lisa about the email.
And I think in certain circles, like I would say, like my kid's private school, like the pressure that you walk into a room and parents just expect that all those kids are going to HYP or similar, and it's hard to kind of resist that a little bit and say, oh, we're just going to go do something different over here. Don't mind us. And it's just, society keeps pushing you a certain way. So it takes discipline, I feel like, to not fall into that trap.
No, it does, because whether we want to admit it or not, as much as we might claim we're totally our own people, we don't care what anybody else thinks. Most of us kind of do care a little bit what some people think, as much, some more than others, but especially people who are in your, sort of inner circle. And for some people, that's a parent. I've been surprised for how many times it's been a grandparent, and the parent is so concerned that their mother or father is not going to be happy with this. And so they're still kind of trying to please their grandparent, and they're 50-year-old
Right.
50-year-old mom and dad. I'm serious.
Yeah. No,
And I know
could
that
totally
because
see
they
that.
tell me, they say it to me. Oh, grandma's not going to like it at all if my kid, So like sometimes it's a grandparent. Sometimes it's like just people in your friendship network and your social circles, whatever that is. And that's true on the parent side, or it's true on the student side, because peers like to be respected. So if they feel like, I don't know if my peers are going to respect me, and let's face it, people say mean things. Like I have kids that report, hearing comments like, thought you could do better. You do better than that, like right to people's face.
Yeah.
And
No. Ugh.
so those kinds of things happen, right? So I get the pressure, but what's so encouraging here is you get emancipated from that and then look at all the good things that happen. And I feel so strongly about this, Lisa, and I know you do as well, because of like it's chipping away at our kids' confidence and mental health
Absolutely.
for no reason. I have another story student working with, they don't listen to the podcast, but California family. The student's done very, very well in this process. Okay. So far this year, admitted to USC, admitted to Wisconsin, but is feeling bad about himself because he didn't get in Duke ED1 or Vanderbilt ED2. And he wanted to know, like, do I have any chance at, and he listed off a bunch of all these other schools. And so I started just reaffirming, like, you are already in amazing places. I'm picking up this sort of woe is me, like I kind of thought my career would get off to a better start on this. And then he specifically said something about Wisconsin, and this is a business major, by the way. Specifically said something. He said, I hear you, but can you really compare Wisconsin to, so he kind of like pushed back at me a little bit, right? So I just happen to remember that as of now, Wisconsin has more Fortune 500 CEOs than any school in the country. So I sent him that article. Guess who has the most? Which school has the most Fortune 500 CEOs right now? And it was like so liberating to him because in his mind, he thought, if I go to Wisconsin, I'm probably destined for like B-level success. But if I go to brand name designer, and USC just wasn't that appealing because, this happens sometimes to people. It's so
Local.
close.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so close. Like, you know what I mean? I kind of want the adventuresome thing to get away. So he was like, that article was like, it was almost like it, and his parents, everybody was like, oh my goodness, this is great, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just trying to get people not to think that, like,
Yeah.
because here's the problem. Here's the other thing I don't like. If you put that much pressure on the school, you're going to walk around with some entitlement. And one day you're going to have a boss that went to like a regional public school to start out community college or something, and you're going to have a hard time dealing with it because you're going to be
Yeah.
like, that's not supposed to happen. I
Right.
went to
I
better school.
sacrificed all of
Yes,
this, my whole
yes.
childhood, my, fortune to go to this school. This reminds me of a conversation I had a couple years ago with somebody I just happened to run into. And the mom was an alumni of Duke and like super jazz, like really like desperate for this kid to get into Duke and didn't know if she would get in or not. And, very tense. And I asked her, what does your daughter want to study? She says film production. And I just look at her. She's like, she really wants to be in North Carolina and study film production. Like, they don't have film production at that school. You know where they do have it? And this is where all my conversations lead back to, right? Elon University. They
Sure.
have an excellent film program. Just, 30 minutes to the west. And, but like they haven't even looked at it because they're in this prism
Yeah,
of Duke. And that's what I think is really interesting about this particular email. She says, I knew it was a better fit. I
yeah.
knew it had more. And yet I didn't let myself see it because I was still really stuck on this, this trap, this Ivy trap. So, yeah, I mean, it's not even true that all these like wonderful schools are always the best fit for a particular student.
Yeah, not at all. And we see it all the time. And so we just want to share this perspective because when a student is going through it in the middle of it, all the world they kind of know is the world of their high school peers. That's literally, they can only see like as far ahead as their nose is. Like they don't have that bigger vantage point, but when you get to see and look back and see what happens to kids, and how they actually fare, your point is extremely well taken, Lisa. It's not like this is the only story out there. This happens more often than we think. This is just someone who said, read it on the air, share my name, share the
Yeah.
schools. I'm preaching the gospel and I want to get the word out. And so, someone willing to go public for it. And but we see this all the time. I mean, I see it so many times where people may not have gotten in a school that was as prestigious as they wanted. And then when they go there, they just thrive and flourish. And not only do they thrive and flourish, they come to realize that the school is really, really good. And I'm talking about well-resourced schools that are somewhat selective. It's just not the most selective. Case in point, University of Richmond. So many of the students that I've had go to Richmond over the years, it wasn't their first choice. Like maybe Princeton was their first choice or something, and then they got there. I mean, I've had maybe like 4 or 5, maybe 5 or 6 that have indeed there. But most of the kids either got in regular or early action, and it wasn't their first choice. And so many of them, and this is a little bit the past because, Richmond is now sort of it's getting more of a national reputation. But in the past, most of the kids that went to Richmond, they were like, is that a public school? Like they just didn't recognize it for what it was. And then either when they got there on the visit or when they arrived there, they're like, whoa. And I had somebody say something to me recently, and it was really, really profound. So a student from the Northeast was a little disappointed that they never got into Notre Dame initially. And the student is in the peer group with the smartest kids. So they felt like they were getting in some more prestigious schools and it was causing her to beat herself up a little bit. And then one of the schools she got in was Santa Clara, which is a great fit for her, by the way. And she ended up getting in a bunch of others as well. But I was just explaining to them this whole thing of, listen, in your little, because the problem was in the Northeast, people don't know Santa Clara. Like they brought this up, right? Like they know Northeastern here. They know BU. They know BC. They know all those schools. Even Villanova is known. But people don't know Santa. This all the stuff that they're telling me. And so they were sort of taking, like, it's a natural tendency to want to show to your peers, like, I've done well in this process too. So she was sort of, being ensnared by that. And so I kind of gave the talk about how, like, once you get to the school, I've seen it over and over, you will realize how good Santa Clara is. And I was talking about when you arrive there. Once you arrive there in the fall, you'll see it. And then the dad made a good point. He said, I would think even a visit could probably help. And I was like, absolutely. So then they took the visit and they were like blown away, So sometimes it's just getting outside of your immediate surroundings. But I don't know how we've got caught up into this belief that with 2,275 4-year bachelor granting not-for-profit schools, that if you don't go to one of the 1%, and there's some places even going to the top 1% isn't good enough. Like, like in their mind, they've bought into a, Harvard, Yale, Princeton mentality or a 5 or 10 school mentality. How we've got caught up into this, if you don't do that, then you're not successful. I don't know what's caused that, Lisa, but, you and I are both going to be black and blue in the face to fight back on that.
It's capitalism. Capitalism caused that. and this illusion of meritocracy, right? And that, and then just, there's a lot of research on how exclusivity, like people think things are more valuable. Like we're just sort of wired that way. Like I read a quote and I forget which college it was, but the president said, like, we're like vodka. Like it all kind of tastes the same. I don't drink vodka, so I don't know. But like, some schools are like pricing themselves as a $2,000 bottle of vodka. And people just think that's better. And it might not be. But it's all about creating that luxury brand exclusivity kind of image that really sucks people in.
How much of it do you feel is just chasing status versus the belief that, boy, the keys for the kingdom open, and if I go there, then, my career is just going to be like jet fuel, and everybody wants what's best for their kids. So who wouldn't want something that's going to,
Yeah.
How much of it do you think is just pure status versus just, I'm setting my kid up for success better?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I would say it probably depends on where you're coming from, but for somebody who's, let's say, upper middle class, that's not in the top 0.0 whatever percent of earners, it feels like, resources are scarce.
Mm-hmm.
And if I send my kid to one of these schools, then they're going to make the connections that they will need to be very, very successful. And if I don't, they won't make the connections and they will be at a disadvantage. And I mean, that is, thinking of your kids' financial well-being is a very powerful motivator for people. I would say even more than status. Now, if you've got all the money in the world, then it's just status, right? Because your kids, got a huge trust fund, got to be fine no matter what.
Yeah, it's some combination of both, and I know it varies from person to person. One thing I want to read again, just to reinforce something, that was said in this email. Another faculty member emailed her after class and offered her more research opportunities, saying, "You asked such great questions in class." And then she wanted to talk about making excellent friends. And the reason why I wanted to talk about that is because I know there's that perception of all these connections and a network. And I'm not trying to say there's no such thing as a network and no such thing, but I'm of the belief that what matters more is your own networking and communication skills.
Right.
And I think that the student put them on display there, and therefore she's getting all these opportunities because of her communication skills and her networking skills. It reminds me, every once in a while, Lisa, I get this urge to reconnect with students I worked with like 20 years ago. Like I've been here now 17 years, so like back to my Westtown days. So I reached out, you connect with people, you're usually on LinkedIn or whatever, and I said, hey, let's meet. It's been a while. So I did two students back to back, both three students actually back to back. And these all were high powered kids. Like one went to Yale, one went to Brown, and one went to Harvard. So high powered. And all three of them were in Wall Street type jobs. Like one had done, you name it, they had done it all, from iBanking to private equity they'd just done it all. And I was asking them, like, in their opinion, how much they thought where they went mattered. And they're like kind of in that world, right? And they definitely felt like it was helpful for them.
Mm-hmm.
But one said in particular, they said, you know what, some people go to where I went to school and they don't take advantage of it, and it doesn't help them at all. And they said other people, and he's talking about people he's seen in his industry, they go to their flagship school and they work that network, and they're successful. So to me, it's more about like your ability to network and use your network and having good communication skills. That to me is the bigger factor. And I wish that times that as much money, resources, mental energy that people put on trying to get into status U, that they would maybe spend some of that time like investing in having their student improve their communication skills or their networking skills.
Right. Like, and that's sort of like the disengaged teen book is like, there's all these different aspects to learning how to be successful other than just grades. And that
Yeah.
I'm sure is a part of it. So yeah, it's screwed up,
And Lisa's sussing that book out, but we are in communication with the authors, and we're in close to nailing down a date to have them on the podcast. Lisa's going to do that, and I think that's going to be great for you guys. They've been all over TV, and the book's kind of really taken off. I haven't read it yet, but everybody I know has read it. Has a lot of great things to say about it. So it's right in that mental health world, like a lot of things we try to address here. So what are the takeaways, Lisa, from this for listeners?
it's not the be all end all to get into a highly rejected school or an Ivy. If you can open your mind to all the different possibilities, you might find something that's even a better fit for you, and you might find a path that's much less stressful.
Yeah, like this is not anti-going Ivy, right? Like I said, most of the people we have in the Ivy League are happy, the majority of them. So, and also even the money thing, I always have to like $100,000 to somebody is 10,000 to somebody else. So I think you have to be careful to say, oh, you shouldn't spend that amount of money, because for some people it's totally nothing, or some people have grandparents paying, or some people started saving for their 529 and the money's all there. So it's not about that either, but it is about like understanding that that is not the only path.
Mm-hmm.
That is not the only path. It's also about understanding that you have way more control over your destiny than what sometimes people think. This is not this fatalistic thing that unless the cards line right for you with college admissions, then you go on this particular sort of career path. And if it really works out well, I guess you're destined for success. And like you're already mentally defeating yourself right away if you think, okay, I didn't go to highly selective U, so I guess I'm probably going to have like C plus level career success, or, and also this stuff's not related to your personal happiness in life either,
Right.
right? And that's a lot more things like, do you have good relationships? Are you doing something that you enjoy? You know, Do you have your health? Like those kinds of things are much more like correlated to like, are you happy in life? And I think sometimes people put so much on this, like, I'm going to be happy. I'm going to be rich. I'm going to be successful. The Red Sea's going to part. I'd much rather people look in the mirror and say, what do I need to do to improve as a person so that I'm the kind of person who gets the job offer and gets the promotion or has the skill set to have successful entrepreneurial ventures. So, well, thank you for listening. And thank you guys. I know this is a little bit of a soapbox hobby horse, if you want to say it. But when we see stuff so entrenched in the culture, we're going to try to combat it with repetition and different creative things. We're like, I'm not just going to lie down dead and say, oh, it is what it is. Like I may go down to the culture, but I'm going down with the fight.
Well, I do think that repetition is important. Hearing it from multiple sources is important. And I think a nice real life example is really important. And I really appreciate the listener who sent this in because I think it'll give a lot of other people hope.
Yeah. And thank you for just being willing to share your story, right? Like, it reminds me of the mom who called in and left a speak pipe message a while ago. And she said that, you know what? I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Just for reinforcement, I'm going to play that message right after this for reinforcement. And everybody hears everything, new listeners all the time. And we all have not a memory. We have a forgetter. Even those who heard might have forgot it. So I'm going to play that message right after this. It's a similar version, just a different person and two different experiences with two different kids. But thanks for joining with me today, Lisa. And have a good spring break. Where are you going?
Thanks. We're going to go to the Turks and Caicos, which I've never been to, but
You are a world traveler.
Not really, but I did notice that the temperature will be between 75 and 79 and sunny every day that we're there. Like the low is 75, the high is 79 every single day. So I'm just looking forward to some consistency because the weather here has just been up and down and crazy.
Wow, I don't even know where that is on the map.
It's in the Caribbean, right? It's,
okay, good for you. Awesome. So it's not too bad of a plane ride.
No, I think it's a couple hours.
Yeah,
in Charlotte,
that's not my style. Yeah,
no time change. So I like trips with no time change. I do not.
Well, you have to report back and give us your recommendations when you get back.
I will. I'm pretty sure I'll also have a sunburn, but what can you do?
I'll call you Red Nose.
All right, I'll be Rudolph. So.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
The next voice you will hear is Beth, and she shares her story about her two students and how they avoided the college trap.
Hi, Mark and everyone on the podcast team. This is Beth, a loyal member of your listening family, and this is a big thank you message. I started listening to the podcast in 2018 or 2019. My son, a high school junior, was a typical standard strong student. At the time, though, I thought he was off the charts. He had taken over 10 AP courses. He was one of the top students in his enormous high school. He had over a 1550 on his SATs, and he was very involved in extracurriculars. He worked crazy hard because he wanted to get into what I call a fancy school. I wanted him to realize his dreams and get rewarded for all the hard work he had done. However, I was very concerned about money. We were an 80th percentile family. The FAFSA and fancy school net price calculators told us that we were expected to pay about $45,000 a year. We had $25,000 per year saved for each of our kids. Because of cost, I would not let my son apply early decision anywhere. At the end of the day, he got into a handful of state schools. He was not happy. I have several friends that did use the early decision option. Seeing their kids get into the fancy schools that my son hoped for made me feel like a bad parent. I was second-guessing my decision to eliminate the early decision option. Now my son is good. He went to the state school for engineering and graduated last year. He is now in a PhD program. He got a full ride at a very strong university that's giving him amazing opportunities. Your podcast helped me when I didn't know who to brainstorm with about all this. Your podcast also helped us consider a wider range of schools, particularly for our daughter, who graduated from high school 2 years after our son. She was also a standard strong student. Your college spotlight on UAB caught my attention. She was interested in nursing, and we wanted a direct admit program that we could afford. She will graduate from UAB with a degree in nursing soon. At the end of it all, we have money left over in their 529 accounts. I can't believe it. And I can't tell you the feeling of relief to know that both kids got the education they needed at a cost that we could afford, and they both enjoyed their college experience. I still never miss an episode. Thanks for all you do.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Okay, Susan, another great question from an anonymous listener. We've never had this question before, so I'll play it and we'll get your thoughts and then I'll chime in.
Hey guys, we love the podcast. In June, when school was still in session, we took a tour at the University of Denver. While we understand that the walking tour portion of a visit to a college is almost 100% of the time student led, we were surprised that the admissions overview was completely run by students, one student in particular, for most of it. When we returned to the admissions office at the end of the tour, the group of us from different parts of the country were looking for someone from the admissions office to answer questions, and no one was available. This struck us as odd and was kind of a red flag. Yesterday, we noticed in the Institute of Higher Education, the University of Denver was mentioned for some financial concerns, which caught our attention and also reminded us of what we went through in June when we took the tour. We're wondering if this is a trend that we should expect at other visits, that perhaps the admissions overview is student run and this is no big deal, or is this something we should take into consideration? And we really were correct with our gut feeling that this was a little strange and we should take that into account.
Where do you want to go with this one, Susan?
Well, I love these questions that come from personal experience.
Yes.
You know, when someone is on a campus or engaged in some part of the college admission process and something happens and they're just like, whoa,
Right.
was that me or were my expectations inaccurate? But our anonymous friend here had a not so great experience at a university visit because they were not greeted by a professional member of the admissions office staff, and that their visit was handled by students and only students, which I'd be interested. I mean, I have never had this experience, Mark.
And I told you that I have had it. Yeah.
So
Single digits, I can count them on one hand, but I have had it before.
Well, and in your case, did you know that's the way it was going to be?
No, I did not know. So a student does the info session. A student does the info session. A student does the tour. Yeah. Tell me your thoughts.
Well, first of all, who's going to talk to you about the admissions process? Because all a student is going to know about the admissions process is what anybody could read, online. They
kind of like sort of like it's a senior fellow type of thing. And then it's they're not speaking extemporaneously, right? It's kind of a canned thing where you have the slides and the PowerPoint and you go through some admission stuff. You do that. And a lot of the information sessions you attend, a lot of them are like this. They don't always leave an opportunity for questions.
Right.
A lot of them will do their presentation and then they'll end by calling the tour guides up. And what I'm noticing more and more of them are saying, which is if you have any questions, admission officers will be back here.
Yeah, stop back after the tour.
Yes, stop back up. Now that didn't even happen in this case. And so our anonymous listener is asking, is that an indication? Should that be is it a trend? I haven't seen enough evidence to know that it's a trend. It's certainly not something that most schools want to put their reputation in the hands of a 21-year-old like that when someone's come 3,000 miles across the country to see them. So I certainly would say it's not a trend. I have seen it probably 3 or 4 times.
Well, and I could see if there was a special day going on where the admission staff was on a retreat, or maybe during the travel season, a lot of them were away and someone was, but then the office would make that clear to visitors and perhaps give the name of the admissions counselor that they could contact, apologetically that, here's the person who can, who's your territory manager and it's funny because truthfully, Mark, the University of Denver to me has always been a very professional and engaging operation. Very student-centered, high ethical standards. I mean, they're known professionally as being, a very caring community and a high-minded community. So if I were anonymous, and she probably has done this already, is I would be, emailing my territory manager, and you can get those names on the admissions website, and just saying, hey, I just want you to know that we were surprised by this, and it was not a positive experience for us to be left in the hands of very nice students, but not professional members of the staff for whom we had some questions. And to ask the question that Anonymous asked us, is this just how Denver manages the public?
No, I've toured there recently. I can't do this for all listeners, but I do have an interview in 2024 coming up with Denver. We've already had the pre-meeting already. So, but I haven't formalized any questions. So I'm actually going to ask this. So Anonymous can get a question answered from the upper brass of their admission office. That interview will. So I said, boy, I always do. That's the first time I've done it. I said 2024. Every time there's a new year, it takes me a while. Yeah. And it's the first time I've messed up that I know of. But 2025, I meant to say. So let's take on her question. Should this be a sign of financial concerns? You have any thoughts on that, Susan?
I would say that we should never extrapolate from an experience like this, as unhappy as it was, to now. I think what Anonymous said is that she then did some other research and seemed to be collecting some data. And I know, Mark, you've done some wonderful episodes on the podcast about, if you do have concerns about a college, which resources that you should use. And maybe you could quickly reiterate those here, just because I think folks need to know where to go to find out that information.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. And so if you want to listen to the end of the Jeffrey Salingo article, and his new book deals with this, it's not out yet, but he tells you where to go in Common Data Set. Basically, there's a few things that you want to do. You want to look at the net tuition revenue.
Right.
That's the most important thing to see, is it declining or not. Looking at the enrollment is also usually a good indicator. However, you have to be careful there, because a school could be doing so much discounting that even that you don't see it in the enrollment numbers, they're still having the financial woes. And then, of course, there's several different organizations. Heckinger is one, and Forbes is another, that have produced these financial, metrics and given grades. And so both the Heckinger report and Forbes can, if you want to go in and sort of look at, not do the legwork yourself, but you can do the legwork. It's not that hard, Section H of Common Data Set, and take a look at it. You can look at a couple of years worth of data to look at their budget. There's other sources as well, that you can look at. I'm going to cover all of this in depth on Monday's episodes. But I agree with you, Susan, that we can't extrapolate from that one point you're having financial concerns. It would be an indication that I would want to do my research for sure, if I saw that, because it is very unusual for a school to not have adults there.
Well, especially when you are taking the time to visit in person, which involves travel and time off. I mean, visiting a campus, I always felt, was the greatest honor that a prospective family could give a college. It's an important step in the research process too, but it's so costly on so many levels for a family to do that. Now, I began my admissions career in the state of Maine, and we had it drummed into us, people don't just drive through the state of Maine on their way to someplace else. It's a end destination state. So people who come are making all sorts of sacrifices to come look at the college. And we just believed in rolling out the red carpeting, because chances are we had one opportunity to get a prospective family on campus. So that's why this, to me, is kind of the anathema, and would surprise me if maybe there wasn't a reason.
Yeah, especially especially when it's not, hey, everybody came down with the flu bug that wiped out our staff or whatever, or something like, what do they call those? Black swan events, whatever there's a name for them, those rare occasions. But, I had the thought, I've shared this on the podcast before, two very irate parents of 4 years ago when the University of Tampa let them know at the last second
Yeah.
that there wasn't going to be housing, and then they just had students manning the phones, and people couldn't even get through.
Unbelievable.
But there was a 5-year freeze on budgets in Florida, and so it did reflect some finances there, the fact that students were put in that difficult situation to take all these calls from parents. So it oftentimes is an indication that they're spreading their resources out. But I wouldn't automatically come to that conclusion off of one thing.
I'd certainly ask point blank.
Yeah, it would certainly make me go investigate and look at the numbers yourself. It absolutely would. And that's something we should all be doing. And right now, I think even more so, because we've talked about it so many times, the challenges that schools are facing. Even more, people really need to look at the finances, in my opinion. And it's other things too. What courses are getting dropped?
Yes.
And just the occasional course getting dropped, I wouldn't conclude that school has financial problems. But when you hear significant numbers of courses are being dropped,
And whole majors.
yes, whole majors, that's a sign as well. But it's hard out there for a lot of schools. Like I've said this before, Susan, there are some schools that would surprise people, that when I ask them, how is your enrollment compared to pre-pandemic, they're still not at their pre-pandemic numbers.
Wow.
Haven't recovered. And, these are not schools that people think of as, dying on the vine and on life support. So great question. I love the creativity of our listeners.
Absolutely.
You guys are awesome. And remember, you get a book. So thanks to the generosity of the Princeton Review, I've got 100 of these to give away when you send in a question and we take it on the air, anything from 501 on. By the way, if I play your message, because sometimes people send in not a question, but a comment. I'm thinking of a few different things. There was a listener a while ago that said, you know what I think you should do for your 500th? I think you should have Dave and Anika back. I miss them. Well, I didn't get them on episode 500, but I did get them on the kickoff episode for season 8. And I played that message from that listener. Also, there was a listener recently that gave a tribute to Hillary and how touched she was by how Hillary answered a question. That listener was from the Bay Area. That constitutes a free book too. So if we play your SpeakPipe message, whether it's a question or a comment that makes it on the air, as long as it's episode 501 or later, just my email's mark@schoolmatch4u.com. Just put in the subject, Princeton free book. If you can remember the episode we aired it on, you put like 517 or something, that is helpful. But sometimes listeners leave a SpeakPipe message anonymously.
Yeah.
And if they do it anonymously, a lot of times I won't even see their email. And SpeakPipe has this thing where I can click reply and I can respond back. And some of the listeners know because I've done it to you. And I can send them a verbal message back.
Oh.
Well, but I can't. Sometimes when it's anonymous, it doesn't even allow for that. So I literally have no way of finding you if you're sending in a question anonymously, unless you reach out and say, hey, I was the one who sent in that question about students. So once again, your choices are Best 390 Colleges, Essays That Kick Apps, the new digital SAT, and just an overview of college admissions in general. So keep sending those questions. We love it. Thanks, Susan.
You're welcome, Mark.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Hi, friends. Very excited about this interview. It's one I've wanted to do for quite some time. As parents, we all want what's best for our kids, for our students. And I've always felt like if maybe we can look out and see the big picture, the future, like what is it that actually matters when employers make hiring decisions? In some ways, it's kind of like finding the big picture out about college admissions. What really matters? It can influence certain things you emphasize or don't emphasize in your own child rearing with your own students. And so today you're going to hear from Don Williamson. I'm going to talk about what employers look for when they make hiring decisions. And Don and I have known each other now for about 5 years. She's a podcast listener. I'm excited to bring Don Williamson to you. So in part one, Don gives her background. We introduce the topic. She walks us through the hiring process. She shares some do's and don'ts when it comes to resumes and cover letters. Don talks about the value of getting out of your comfort zone and having diverse experiences. Don gives advice for someone who's looking for a job. And Don explains the role of where you went to college plays in the hiring process. Listen and enjoy. Friends, I am very excited today. I am with Don Williamson. Hi, Don.
Hi, Mark.
So I've known Don for, has it been 5 years, Don? 4? Something like that? What do you think?
About almost 5 years.
Is that crazy? Wow.
Yeah.
And Don and I have been talking for maybe, what would you say, a year and a half maybe about doing this interview? Maybe even 2.
Yes, we have.
And I'm very excited. So I'm going to interview Don on what employers look for when they make hiring decisions, which I think is really important because when parents know, what's important, it can actually influence what they emphasize with their own student. But before we dive in, Don, share your backstory and walk us right up to what you're doing now.
Okay, great. Well, first, I'm excited to be here because this is such an important topic. Career development, growth, ultimately what our children pursue is so important. And so I'm always happy to share my backstory. I grew up in New York City. I went to NYU. I studied East Asian Studies and Economics. I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I just pursued things that I enjoyed and enjoyed studying. I ran a club when I was in college. It was the Asian Business Association. I always had a job part-time. I worked as a physical therapy assistant. I was really reception, but very quickly I started to be the assistant. And I did internships every summer. So I was a very busy college student. It took me a bit to figure out my career once I graduated. My first job out of college was with PricewaterhouseCoopers as a paraprofessional. It was a very unique opportunity where they hired specifically liberal arts graduates. So I was very fortunate to get that. But then I quickly learned I did not want to pursue accounting, and I went the opposite spectrum. I started working for a non-for-profit called the Asia Society. And then through that journey, I started to realize, you know what, I do want to find a profession that is something relatable, but also that I felt I could do well. And then I found media. And so I started as a sales assistant in media.
And why don't you walk us through going from a sales assistant all the way up to what you're doing now?
Sure. So started as sales assistant, and I noticed that the buying side, at that point I was selling media, the buying side, which was the agency side, seemed very interesting because they got to work with advertisers as well as vendors meaning Facebook. Back then that wasn't even in existence, but at the time it was broadcast media, cable, etc. So my real first opportunity was working on the agency side for about 4 years. I worked on big clients like McDonald's, Universal Pictures, Dove Soap. And then I also was very intrigued with the sales side. At that time, the sales side really appreciated the agency background because you dealt with clients as well as the different vendors. And my first job was in broadcast media as a salesperson in daytime. And I slowly navigated. At that time, cable was still early days. It was really just starting to boom. And I had an opportunity with Turner Broadcasting at the time, which today is called Discovery Warner. And I worked with Cartoon Network, and Cartoon Network was early days where cable was growing, and we were doing websites, and we were able to do licensing for those of you that are Powerpuff Girl fans or anything that's, old school Cartoon Network. It gave me exposure to working for a content provider as well as selling advertising. Through that, I helped launch Adult Swim, and I was on the sales side for many, many years. I was at Turner for 14 years. Then I moved over to international. and ultimately have been in sales for many years to this point. Now I'm at Comcast Advertising as Chief Revenue Officer for Media Solutions. From my experience, it's been great to be part of an industry that's continuing to grow and be dynamic. And it was good to take some different risks in my career to learn different things.
Thank you for that. And Dawn is in South Florida too. So if you want to kind of visualize where she's at right now. So as I said early on, we're going to talk about what employers look for when making hiring decisions. Dawn has been actively involved in hiring a lot of people in her career. So Dawn, why don't you just start by walking us through the hiring process from start to finish?
Sure. So the hiring process every organization is different, but in Comcast, what we do is we definitely go through the resume process, look for skill set and requirements. We oftentimes set up panels, so it's not limited to just one person interviewing this candidate, but we interview with potentially folks that are partner teams as well as HR. And so you get a very holistic view of the candidate. And what you're looking for when you're interviewing is obviously functional skills, but also interests, the way they can talk to some of their achievements, and really see if this is an individual that has the skill set, knowledge, and interest in the type of role that we have. But yes, what we do is regroup as a panel, talk about feedback, and then we take a decision as a panel group.
All right, let's talk about resume and cover letters, because I know that's a part of the process. So what would you say are some do's and don'ts when it comes to resume and cover letters?
Sure. I would say do's on the starting point is really attribute some of your successes in your, whether it's your cover letter or resume. So if you are a leader of a club, mentioning that you doubled the membership gives the hiring manager a sense of the level of achievement that you've made. If it's an actual number, that's really good to reference. It's also good to say that. If you raised funds, it's good to be explicit around what your strategy was and how that contributed to some results. So anytime you could be specific and attribute results, I think that's a nice standout in a resume because it enables the hiring manager to know that you are critical in your thinking, you can execute a plan, and you could drive results. And I really feel that that would apply for any job. Tight communication is also really important, being simple, speaking in simple language. We don't need to make it too complex. But I do think anytime that folks could reference different, diverse experiences that they've had, I think that really shapes the individual and gives one an idea of the type of profile that candidate has.
So those would be the do's. Can you think of things that were like, flags like, you know what, this person's not going to make it on to the next round off of either resume or cover letters?
Sure. I think generalizations, any kind of resume that is very generic, doesn't pop, like I mentioned, without any specificity around achievements. It could be a generic resume and it doesn't enable that individual to stand out. I do like folks that, work in association, nonprofits, clubs, anybody who even has a part-time job, even though it may not necessarily be relevant exactly to the job at hand. If they're in a service business, if you were a part-time, wait staff, those are things that show this is somebody who knows how to work in a team environment, knows how to service, knows how to have good conversation. So I wouldn't only limit to things that may fit perfectly for the job description, but also show how well-rounded you are as an individual. I think that's important as well.
I'm going to share something with you, and I'd like to get your take on this. It's something that's really stuck with me. I believe I've shared this at least once on the podcast before, but a family I was working with, a client, I worked with them twice actually from the mountain region of the country. The dad hires hundreds of people, pretty large company he works with. And one thing he says he likes when he sees that somebody's done something pretty adventuresome. Like he likes it when he sees kids that have gone abroad or even kids that went all the way across the country to go to college. Does that surprise you? Like when you hear that, does that resonate, or do you think of that as, that's just his own thing?
No. That resonates with me completely. I think, getting out of your comfort zone forces you to be resilient and it shows that you have a growth mindset. I think folks that have traveled, have done, adventure, some like eco adventures where they may save the turtles. There's so many different ways that individuals grow. And I think the more diverse the experiences, the more well rounded that individual is. And the more, as you think about the corporate world, as you're entering it, you have so many different facets of cultures, personalities, backgrounds. The ability to connect on those levels are really helpful. I will tell you something that I remember as you just told me that story. When I think I interviewed at Chase, back when I graduated. And one of the questions that I got as an interview question was, tell me about yourself that's not on this resume. Tell me something that's totally not represented here. And at that point, it was kind of on the spot. So I said, I'm a ballet dancer. I've been dancing ballet since I was a kid. I've been performing. But, I never found it appropriate to put on my resume. And he said something great to me. He said, you know what? That means that you're comfortable on a stage. That means you're comfortable representing yourself. You're comfortable in your space. And that was like a really interesting insight that I would have never thought to bring into an interview. But I thought it was great that he asked me, like, tell me something that's not on this paper that I should know about you.
That reminds me a lot of college admissions. One of the things that can really make someone pop in college admissions that a lot of times students and parents don't think about is someone who's interesting and unique. In fact, I was just having a conversation with a former admission officer at MIT, and we were having this conversation about what is it that you saw that oftentimes distinguished people that, were desirable versus not. And this whole topic came up, being interesting and unique. Is that part of what you're alluding to there?
Yes, 100%. I think that, the more experiences one has when they're young and the more they have put themselves into situations, whether it's working at a restaurant, being a player on a team, being a member or a leadership role in an organization, studying a variety of different subjects. It shows that that individual is willing to take some risks, able to understand the value of growth and the diversity of experiences and how that shapes you. So for me, when I look at, hiring individuals, I'm interested in the whole person, because I do think in the business world, it's not enough to know the academics of the job, or even what you study. It's important to know how you think about it and how you apply it into whatever you pursue. So, if I had an encouraging message to, anybody's listening or they have a young adult who's looking to, pursue a job, it's try a lot of different things, because through that experience, that's how you start to define and shape your own personality and what you can contribute to an organization.
Don, I know when you and I were talking, maybe a few months or so ago, but we were talking about doing this interview. One thing you said that stood out to me is where someone went to college, that may be number 5 or number 6 on the list. Do you remember saying that to me?
Yes, I do. I do.
So double question. You're not supposed to do that. I'm going to do it. So what I think our listeners would be surprised. Some of them, a lot of them think it's number 1. If not 1, it's definitely 2. So this would be the question. What makes you have it down so far on the list, and what are some of the things that you would say are more important to you than where someone went to school?
Yeah, I look at where you go to school as a data point of many data points that I consider when I'm hiring. Obviously, everything is a generalization at some point, right? Some schools have a certain reputation and may have some strength in certain academic areas. So it's one of those that, oh, that's an interesting insight. But ultimately, everyone's journey is so independent in terms of where they choose to go to school, whether it be financial, physical proximity, family dynamics. So I think to put too much weight on that is not really fair. I think it's a data point that you consider, but like I mentioned, it's so much more important to understand the full person and what their experiences have been, where they've taken leadership opportunities, how they've navigated their 4 years of college, Obviously, entry level, where you go to school feels like that much more pressure. But honestly, like I said, I'm really looking at the person as a whole. What did they study? What were their extracurricular activities? What type of part-time jobs or extracurricular activities have they done and engaged in? Sports, theater, I think anything that also involves a team effort and experience also helps. But I do look at it as a data point more so than anything else. I think it's really what the student does with their time when they're in college and what they invest in is incredibly important because, the college piece, it's such a variable in terms of the contributing factors of where one goes. I don't think that should be the leading indicator of an individual.
Friends, this concludes this part of my interview with Don Williamson. We hope you join us next week for the second part.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Kevin Newton, what's up, my friend?
Mark, good to see you again, buddy.
Yeah, and we'll be seeing each other soon in person. Kevin and I are going to go grab some good Dallas eating on April 12th on my trip. I'm excited.
I can't wait. The hard part's going to be getting it down to one restaurant, but we
Yeah,
have to do a little
true.
tasting tour.
There you
Our
go.
wives won't mind too much.
Hey, I'm single for 3 weeks, so I'm good. So, listen, Kevin reached out. Well, we've been talking back and forth, but a lot of new developments happening in international schools. A lot of new opportunities, things that Kev will tell you are happening for the first time. Something as recently as this morning you got an email on. Major change. Kev, take it where you want to go.
So, yeah, there have been a lot of, shall we say, interesting developments. And I think no need to bury the lead. I literally, half an hour ago, I got an email from the new acting co-director of admissions at St. Andrews announcing a change to the way that they're doing admissions. And typically, if you go to St. Andrews' website, it will say international applications are open until June 30th, which is the UCAS cutoff. But it's been really popular wisdom that you don't apply after the UCAS deadline of equal consideration unless you're interested in something like chemistry or geology or modern languages or English that just don't get a lot of traction.
Kev, tell our listeners what that deadline typically is, because they won't know that.
Oh, typically it's the end of January. This year it was the 29th. I think next year it's going to be the 31st. It's always sometime in the end of January for UCAS. But it's the less popular degrees that are still typically open. And, with St. Andrews, as well as with the other ancient Scottish universities, you can kind of maneuver your way into what you actually want to study. Up to a third of St. Andrews students change their course of study during their time there. So it's very, very popular to do. But I just received an email from the acting co-director of admissions saying, because I wanted to confirm that there's a number of my applicants this year have been told, hey, we're from St. Andrews, we're running behind on admissions. We have too many applicants and we're having to kind of sort through everyone. This is a new thing for them. And St. Andrews, it's already one of the most popular universities for American students. 20% of the student body is American. And honestly, this caught me in a complete surprise that they are making spaces, even in their most popular degree fields, for Americans applying later. So if you're, let's say that Ivy Day or whenever comes around and you're thinking, you didn't get the offer you wanted or whatever reason, throw your hat in for St. Andrews. There are worse ideas. And
I would reverse it. I would say if you have interest, apply now. Applying is not committing to go. It's like one of my mentors, right? You don't have to wait until Ivy Day to make the decision.
It is a pretty straightforward application. There are, we can talk about that later, or, some other time. But it's also just a theme that I'm seeing more and more for, shall we just give it the very broad term of reasons, that a lot of international universities are really trying to make space for Americans who may be looking for someplace to spend the next 3 or 4 years. Or even, and I know we don't really talk about this that much here, but a lot of universities are looking at the recent cuts in funding for graduate programs and thinking this is their chance to really secure some top-tier talent.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing is a real increase in opportunities. I was talking to some of my colleagues who work in oceanic admissions. They're trying to broaden access for Americans. It's, again, without drifting into certain subjects, it's really, if you're looking for a to start somewhere new in August or September or sometime like that, and you happen to be a university student, you've still got time. The only places I can think of that right now are not still accepting applicants, I wouldn't do it in a Dutch university because the housing, you're just going to pay an arm and a leg for housing at this point if you can find it. But certain Canadian universities, and then the old standbys of Oxford, Cambridge, LSE, and Imperial. And I'm going to confirm with my Imperial colleague next week that they may still have some spots open. It's a wild time.
Let me ask you this, because this is my question. For highly selective schools, they're not needing to do this to quote unquote meet their number and meet their budget. Are they expanding their class size and going to bring in a bigger class, or are they just looking at it like maybe we can upgrade our talent and we're not going to change our class size, but why would we walk away from some top tier talent that might want to look at us now? What do you see going on there, or do you think it's a different answer for different schools?
I think to give a pretty big generalization, it's a little bit of both, but definitely more the latter. Is that they see this as an opportunity. They've been looking, and a conversation that I continually have with admissions representatives and others who work on the other side of the desk, as it were, is that they really want to increase their visibility. They really think that, for the right student, and again, not every student should consider going abroad. It's not, and not every country is perfect for every student. There's a reason we talk a lot about fit. And,
Sure.
Just yesterday, I was having a conversation with a student, and, they were saying how interested they were in one university. And they had, shall we say, a rather unique demographic background. And I had to break it to them that, given how you identify, given these facts about you, you may not be comfortable there. You've more than got the grades. You've more than got the test scores. It's just, you may not find your people there. But I think that what they're looking at is this is a chance to really internationalize their undergraduate classes. And especially for those top universities, the top 100, 200 universities around the world, American students have always been kind of a get, for lack of a better term, because I can speak from experience. I've been doing this for about a decade, and
Right.
it's a rapidly growing field. And even before certain external events that increased that motivation, it was still growing. And it's driven by a lot of things, that we've talked about before that we don't have to get into today. But they're looking at this. I know some places are even increasing their merit aid offerings because they recognize that, if they offer someone a £2,000 or £3,000 merit scholarship a year, that might drop it down to being competitive with what they're paying in state.
Yeah, that sounds like what internally happens over in this country, where you constantly have the private schools trying to see if they could compete with the public schools through merit scholarships, especially the the moderately selective to less selective ones. Even some vary, but not usually extremely selective, will do that game. So what would you say, Kev, is the increase in U.S. applicants that these schools are seeing? Like, do you think it's going to be more than 10% if they were to compare year over year?
I think where it really gets into, and where, if you do a little bit of work on the back end, you've got some real potential to stand out, is that right now it's the big names that are seeing this.
Sure.
St. Andrews, Edinburgh, Oxford, Cambridge, they're seeing a huge increase in demand. Yeah. Those are 4 universities out of the 130, 140 some odd universities in the UK. They're,
right.
For the other side of the world, University of Melbourne has seen an increase. University of Sydney, Australian National University, that's 3 out of the 40 or so universities that are between Australia and New Zealand.
London School of Economics?
I think they're seeing a bit of an increase as well. Admittedly, it's those places that people have heard of. And it's, you were just making the point about moderately selective and even very selective institutions. I'm working with someone right now who actually we had dinner a couple months ago, and this individual, he's a very proud parent, and rightfully so. I don't know which he was more proud of, the fact that his child had been offered an interview at an Oxbridge institution, or the fact that they'd been offered a scholarship at a top 20 UK university besides. So it's admittedly, I'm even seeing the words full tuition thrown around.
Wow. You're talking about full tuition is in full tuition merit?
Full tuition merit, and this is something that 3 or 4 years ago was simply unheard of, because the idea was, it's very similar. I will try to keep my past experiences of my personal life out of this, but going to a public university out of state, you know that you're to some degree you're subsidizing. And this is something that we've really seen. It's not the kind of thing that, ethically speaking, I would not tell anyone, oh, just apply overseas, you're going to get a merit scholarship,
Right.
But it is, the way I'm seeing it is really the cherry on top, that if you're willing to look at a few other places that maybe aren't the Oxford, Cambridge, Edinburgh, St. Andrews, Imperial, LSE, that particular set of places that are very well known here in the US, and look at places that have amazing global reputations and still good reputations in the US. It's just, when you say Durham in the context of higher education, you think of the home of Duke University. You don't necessarily think of Durham University in the UK. And if you're in the UK, you think of Durham as being the kind of number 3 spot in some cases to Oxford and Cambridge. With respect to my friends at St. Andrews, Edinburgh, everywhere else that would claim that number 3 spot.
What about Canada? Do you see an increase in Canada as well, or not? What are your?
I'm seeing a little bit.
I know that's one place where we both overlap. Like I do some Canada, you do some Canada.
Right.
Both of us. What are you seeing there?
Honestly, I can't really speak intelligently about Canada, because most of my students, who are looking at this are wanting to go a bit further away.
Sure.
I've had a few Canadian applicants. They've done pretty well.
Right. But none of your people think of you more as further away most of the time they seek you out. I get it. Yeah.
Admittedly, unless you're an American citizen, or unless you're a Canadian citizen, the benefits of going to Canada versus benefits of going to Australia or the UK, it's still typically 4 years instead of 3. It's admittedly, there are pros and cons to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is something I should know, and I cannot believe it. I don't know this. I'm embarrassed. Do you do grad school admissions at all? Is that part of what you do?
Absolutely.
I thought you probably did, just because of what you said a second ago. I'm so locked into that undergrad world, so I oftentimes ask you that. So, what's going on here, cuts in NIH, people dropping programs. I don't know if you saw University of Pennsylvania literally rescinded acceptances they'd already made because they were going to be, reducing programs. And then on this end, you have people who are like, well, why would I go get a PhD to go in to do research in something that might cost me a lot of money and isn't guaranteed to make a lot of money? Like, now the risk proposition just seems so much greater, because I don't even know if there will be a job for me at the other end. Are you seeing the interest more on the grad school side, undergrad, both? Tell me about that.
Really on both. And, something that's in the past, I've said, for grad school, that if you receive funding to do a PhD, it's hard to argue with. And it's a bit of a process to get funding overseas. Typically, what you have to do is you have to already have a master's degree. It's a taught master's degree. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, you have to do your degree with honors, which is an extra year of work. These are really broad generalizations, but you have to prove that you're pushing the limits so that you could just jump into a research-only program. And then there are groups like in the UK, the Arts and Humanities Research Council, that do provide funding even for overseas students. What I've seen a real increase in are, because you've got to time those just right. And something that I just, spreading, from the mountaintop, as it were, is I think it's really cool how the Netherlands does graduate admissions, or especially for research positions for PhDs. And normally, I say the Netherlands has a lot going for it, but take it with a grain of salt. There have been some changes in how they want to go forward with their English taught undergraduate programs. And, there's a political movement in the Netherlands that is similar to certain political movements here in the US. So it's just, it's not all sunshine and roses, but you essentially look for a PhD program in the Netherlands like you would look for a job here. You see the PhD that's being offered. They tell you what the research is going to be in. You apply. And I think the brilliant part is some of these stipends are up to €4,000 a month I remember from my graduate school days, €4,000 a month would have been pretty darn nice.
Sure,
I know
sure.
that friends of mine who have had graduate stipends here in the US, that's a bit healthier than what they're working with. So, especially, if you're in a STEM field and you're in a position or somebody, if you're bummed out, to put it very mildly, about the state of STEM PhDs with the recent funding cuts, look at the Netherlands. It's going to be competition, certainly, but there are some great options there. And honestly, you're going to get a better stipend, and, you're going to have a research environment that's, again, I want to thread the needle carefully here to be as respectful as possible, but that is, open to what you're actually doing.
It's nice to know those stipends extend to Americans. Yeah. I want you to go back to something you started saying right away when we first started talking. You talked about competitive majors. We were talking in the context mostly of St. Andrews. I think our listeners would find that interesting. What are the most competitive majors for St. Andrews? And what are the ones that you could always get in later? In effect, they had the UCAS deadline, but then they still had space, and they effectively went to rolling admissions through the spring and maybe even early summer. What are those most competitive, least competitive, and do you find it's consistent from school to school, or were you just strictly talking St. Andrews and it would have been completely different if it was another school?
I think that they do switch up as to what's competitive and what's not competitive. By far, the most competitive fields at St. Andrews are going to be international relations and management. Mm-hmm. Those are phenomenally difficult fields to get into. I mean, they still have very attractive acceptance rates for Americans, but it is admittedly, St. Andrews aims to have the best undergraduate experience in international relations in Europe. And, they do a pretty darn good job of it, to be quite honest with you. With management, very similar. They really are zeroed in on that. I think, when you step away from it, what you'll find are certain fields that, if we're going to speak broadly from university to university, it tends to mirror a little bit what we see here in the US.
I wondered about that.
Computer science is going to be competitive wherever. That said,
I don't know if you're seeing this, but finally the tide is starting to shift there, and schools are experiencing less comp sci applicants than they had in the past, and comp sci apps are down actually first year in a while, but noticeably in quite a few instances. I think it partly has to do with, for one, there's a lot of talk about this, and we're going to do a segment on this at some point. Like, jobs in comp sci actually have gotten hard to come by.
Right.
And so when word spreads, it's really, really hard to get into a program, and there might be oversaturation in the marketplace. That starts to filter into the public consciousness, and then it starts to shift the demand patterns.
I was actually speaking with someone yesterday, and they brought up that they were interested in computer science for the longest. But now that things are shifting, they're looking a little bit more, they ended up focusing a little bit more on law, which, not to beat one of my favorite drums about the UK in particular, but overseas in general, law and medicine are typically undergrad fields. So, medicine is always going to be the most competitive subject at a university. And in fact, it's very rare that I see a student from the United States who I'm like, okay, you've got a solid shot at this. You'd have to have 5s on your APs and everything else. But undergraduate studies in law, we've placed students as late as August for a end of September start date. So
Wow.
it's at a top 15 law school in the UK. So again, it's not always what you would think. Computer science, international relations tends to be, especially during, shall we say, spicy times on the global stage.
I like that term.
I know.
I'm going to have to start using that term, spicy.
Two of my best friends, actually, the irony is all of my best friends, really. One of them was a Persian linguist in the military. The other has his master's degree in Arabic studies. And,
Man, you really are a wonk.
Like,
those are your best friends.
Another one of us went to Johns Hopkins SAIS, and the fourth is high up at DHS, and it's just the guys' group chat on international relations is lit right now. As the kids would say, it is lit.
I'm sure.
Our wives are so bored of us, it's not even funny.
Funny. Any other new developments? Anything else our listeners should know, changes or things to be aware of on the international scene?
I think, and again, this was something I was looking really forward to talking to until I got that email from St. Andrews this morning. Sure. We're also seeing that more and more international universities are moving away from the AP as a gold standard. So we had the big news this year, and I confirmed it a few weeks ago with the new director of North American admissions for King's College London, that if your high school does not offer APs, you do not have to jump through any special hoops. They will consider your grades as is. So
it's interesting, because in some ways I feel AP is having more significance in some ways. It isn't. In the U.S. So it isn't in the sense that more and more and more schools are moving away from AP exams. So the more schools, and I'm talking mostly about highly selected privates, but in some cases publics as well. So the more people move away from it, from sort of what would be deemed as great feeder schools, the more schools adjust to that, and it's not so atypical, and they get comfortable as a reader with that setup. So that certainly is happening. I was having a conversation with somebody earlier this week about a school that never really read files very well other than through the AP prism, and I've seen improvement in how they read files now, from people that high schools that aren't offering the AP curriculum. But, and I've got an interview that I'm actually doing in 4 days on this topic, so listeners will hear a lot about it. But, I've had a lot of conversations on the podcast that have been very pro-test optional or pro-no-harm policies. And I've had someone for a while who's much more of a bigger advocate of testing, and he's wanted to come on the podcast for probably a year and a half. And we've had some sessions and some conversations, and I wasn't really ready for him, but he reached out to me again and asked again, and I am ready for him now. Partly because I do want listeners to hear the other arguments, and we'll agree on some things and we'll disagree. And I also think that will probably make for some good, interesting audio. But one thing that he is right to point out, and I have noticed it, is without test scores for highly selective schools, AP scores have more significance than they previously did in many instances. I asked Christoph Gutentag from Duke this in my interview with him, but I kind of knew the answer before I even asked him. And the question I asked him was, do AP scores take on more significant if someone's a test optional applicant? I knew he would be honest, and he was. He said, he basically said, yes, we like to see some standard benchmark in the file. So it's weird. So I know that, David Blowbaum's the guy I'm having on. I know he's going to want to talk about that because we've already had been going over our content before. He's going to really want to point out to listeners the increased role AP scores are taking in some schools, even changing some of their policies related to that. Now, the problem when we talk this way is, if you look at the 2,275 U.S. schools, 4-year bachelor granting, not-for-profits, we're talking about a very small slice of them. And when you talk this way, it's unless you're very lucid in your communication, it can come across, oh my goodness, this is new for me. Everything's changed. And the reality, and I fully expect that even more so now with the problems that the colleges are having for funding. There's just not that many schools that can afford to swim upstream and buck the national trends, go against what the population wants, and not see, application diminishment. And it's pretty rare for application diminishment to be acceptable. It's funny, I'm tracking schools like Brown and Yale that experience some pretty significant slippage in applications. Be interesting to see if that continues with them, whether or not we see adjustments in policies. It reminds me of the SAT, ACT, like those two watch each other like a hawk, right? As soon as one moves ahead in market share and stays ahead for a few years, it's normally time for the other one to come out and roll out a whole new revised version of
right.
What they opt. Like, it's just basic survival instincts. Like if the market is telling me they don't like my product, don't get me wrong, the Browns and Yales are in no danger of the market telling them they don't like. But it'll be interesting if they, maybe it's just 1 year data. We'll see. But, and I don't think there's any question it's correlated to them going back to required testing.
Oh,
yeah. Sorry to sort of incorporate so much U.S. stuff in an international conversation.
You're good. And, again, it's something that I'm really happy to see. Now, with regards to the SAT and ACT, a lot of places are still requiring them, but they're very upfront about what their minimums are. And in a lot of cases, these are, I'm loath to use the word achievable or easy because, I like to say you don't judge a fish's intelligence by its ability to climb a tree. And, but they're using them as a replacement for other things. And even those in instances can be, subbed out. So, but again, it's where the universities in the UK that are still requiring either IB or AP scores, it's the same usual suspects: Oxford, Cambridge, LSE, Imperial, and UCL. But we're working on UCL and Imperial. We'll see how they go, but we're working on them.
Interesting. And you're talking about, for those are the ones you've seen less requirements on APs. But what about SAT, ACT?
Those 5 are the ones that still are requiring APs. With ACT, okay. SAT, we're definitely seeing, shall we say, a broadening. So if a student's done well in dual enrollment courses, and, I've got students right now who he's finished his associate's degree, they don't need to see an ACT or SAT. They can clearly see that this student can do university level work at a high level. They see the GPA. And again, it's something that I think that I think it's really kind of ironic that in a lot of instances, these overseas universities put more stock in American community colleges than we do, because they're great places. I know if I can plug the work a friend of mine is doing, James Cook University in Australia, their American rep is working around the clock to build formal agreements that if you get your associate's degree, you can transfer right into James Cook.
Wow.
And
Smart.
I know, I believe you're talking to her soon, actually. She's doing some really cool work with that. And I think that more and more these universities overseas are recognizing the quality of, dual enrollment and things like that. So that's a possible route if you're looking to avoid the ACT or SAT as well.
Friends, this completes the first half. Hope you'll join us next week for the final part. Friends, I promise you, if you stay to the close, if you would get one more letter. This time it's from a dad. This is a really cool story as well. I got this email yesterday, and I'm going to call this dad Stamps Dad. So if you wonder, what are you talking about, Stamps Dad? Well, I read it to you, and in order to understand the context, this dad had a grueling decision: pay full price at Stanford or have his student be one of 5 students in the entire country who got the Stamps Scholarship from Wake Forest, which is not only full cost of attendance, but it comes with all kinds of incredible perks. So this is really, really cool. So this dad, this is a letter. He sends it to me yesterday. Mark, I want to write to give you an update on a listener question that you highlighted on Your College Bound Kid podcast on episode 82 in 2019. 6 years ago, friends. 6 years ago. So cool that he reached back out. The question was whether to take a stamp scholarship at Wake Forest versus paying full price for Stanford. The update: my son went to Wake Forest. Wake covered all costs for him to double major, to go to Europe for 2 different summers, to spend his 3rd year at the London School of Economics. After Wake, he was admitted to the grad school at Georgetown School of Foreign Service, and he graduates this May. He also has recently been admitted to Harvard Law School. He wants to study international trade law, and he is well on his way. In your original answer 6 years ago, you said to me, if he can get into Stanford now, he can get into a similar school for grad school. I had no idea that would be Harvard. Your advice was perfect. I hope you keep spreading the knowledge. Thanks again, Stampstad. And then this is so cool. To show it was 6 years ago, he says, tell Dave and Anika hello from a longtime listener. You know, Anika's been off the podcast for over 4 years and Dave for over a year. Counselor Connect members, we will see you on Sunday for a special presentation on opportunities overseas with 2 international admission officers, Mubarak and Emma. On Monday's episode, I'm going to talk about what parts of the college application process take the most time and what juniors should be doing now. Then we'll have a brand new interview with Rob Franick, chief editor of the Princeton Review. Rob was on in 2024, but this time he's coming back to share what they learned from almost 10,000 surveys they did. Over 7,000 students and over 2,000 parents who just recently completed their College Hopes and Worries survey. And it's 23 years in a row they've been asking these 20 questions. 18 of them are the same, so they can track results over time. So it's a 2-parter, and we hope you join us Monday for that. And friends, remember, it's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's not where you go. But it's what you do when you get there. It's what you do when you get out of there. That is what will determine your career trajectory. See you Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.